Zimbabwe's new UN Security Council seat, what they don't want you to know. On Wednesday, June 3rd, Zimbabwe's delegation at the United Nations in New York erupted in celebration. Zimbabwe had just secured a non-permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council, receiving 182 votes out of 191 cast, comfortably surpassing the 2/3 majority required to join the world's most powerful peace and security board. President Mnangagwa welcomed the outcome, describing it as evidence of Zimbabwe's growing international acceptance. We quote him, he said, "I am extremely humbled by the support Zimbabwe has received from the international community. It means that Zimbabwe has very excellent relations with the rest of the world," he said. And back home, state media ran the story war to war. What state media didn't run was everything else. So, Zimbabwe, welcome back. Tiripopa mzinda wevanhu pano, ndini wenyu super galo. If you are not subscribed, please do so now. Follow us if you're watching us on Facebook. And thanks to our channel members, thanks to the ones who are subscribed, who are paying every month to keep this independent journalism going forward. Right. So, let's talk about the timing nobody is talking about. Let's establish the timeline, because the timing here is not a coincidence. On Tuesday, CAB 3, the most constitutionally controversial bill Zimbabwe has seen since 2013, was tabled in Parliament by Justice Minister Ziyambi. On Wednesday, while Parliament fast-tracked its first and second readings, Zimbabwe was simultaneously winning a seat at the table where the world discusses democracy, human rights, and international law. Despite a history of human rights violations and attempts to change the constitution to extend the president's term, the Zimbabwean government is touting its UN Security Council election victory as an international endorsement of a nation that has long been isolated by Western countries. That framing is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and it's working exactly as designed. What the seat actually is: Zimbabwe will serve a 2-year term beginning in January 2027, joining fellow elected members Trinidad and Tobago, Portugal, Austria, and Kyrgyzstan. Yes, Kyrgyzstan. Yeah. Right. The Security Council is the United Nations body charged with maintaining international peace and security, with responsibilities ranging from conflict resolution and peacekeeping to the imposition of sanctions and the authorization of international interventions. As a non-permanent member, Zimbabwe will not possess veto power. That authority remains exclusively with the 5 permanent members: China, France, Russia, United Kingdom of Britain, and United States of America. So Zimbabwe gets a seat, but not a veto. Veto, panaya asingaziva kureva kuti chero vakaplana something vakavhota out of maybe 20 members, 19 vakati tiri kuda kuti chinhu chiitike, but for those nations 5 that are no holder a veto power. One nation ikangosunga ikati no, let's not do it, then it is not going to be done. So this is only Zimbabwe's 3rd time on the Security Council since independence in 1980, having previously served in 1983 and 84 and 1991 to 1992, returning to the powerful board for the first time in 33 years. The real agenda: sanctions. Here is the part Mnangagwa's government will not say out loud at the State of the Nation address, but he has been very candid about in the fine print. The government wants to use its seat to push against sanctions imposed on Mnangagwa, his family, and allies by the US and the UK. Membership in the UNSC, United Nations Security Council, creates a platform to challenge sanctions narratives directly. Listen to that again. Zimbabwe has just won a seat on the board that imposes global sanctions at a moment when its own president and his inner circle are under sanctions for human rights abuses and election fraud. You cannot make this up. For President Mnangagwa, who has been isolated over human rights violations and election fraud since taking over power through a military coup in November 2017, this is a diplomatic win. But analysts are being clear-eyed about what this actually means. As one commentator put it, the election does not amount to a blanket endorsement of Mnangagwa or his government. How Zimbabwe won unopposed? Here is the question nobody in the celebration photographs was asking. How does a country in the middle of a constitutional crisis, with generals publicly accusing its president of a power grab and war veterans in the constitutional court, how does that country win 182 out of 191 votes? The answer is African solidarity and what it costs. Zimbabwe was the sole candidate from the African continent after the African Union fully endorsed it. The task then was simply to convince countries from Eastern Europe and Asia to back the candidates. When you run unopposed, you don't win, you are installed. The AU handed Mnangagwa a global platform, no questions asked, while back home his own generals were calling Cape 3 a personal and political project of a cabal. Critics argue Harare's international messaging sharply contrasts with the political tensions and constitutional disputes dominating domestic politics. That's a polite way of saying Zimbabwe told the world one story and is living a completely different one. What this means for Cape 3. This is the part that should concern every Zimbabwean paying attention. Mnangagwa now has a global legitimacy shield. Every time a Western government or international human rights board raises concerns about Cape 3, the democratic rollback or the rigging of parliament, Harare's response will be 182 countries chose us. The world has spoken. The UN seat doesn't stop Cape 3. It doesn't restore direct presidential elections. It doesn't return the vote to the people. But it gives the men dismantling Zimbabwe's constitution a very expensive-looking suit to wear while he does it. In Zimbabwe, this diplomatic win by Mnangagwa's government was eclipsed by the ongoing Cape 3 debate in parliament. Eclipsed, but also perfectly timed. That's not a coincidence. That's a strategy. Muri Zimbabwe, toda to understand the power of this seat and also what it is not. Because, of course, Papa ZBC, this thing is overhyped. It's like, yeah. But sezamanza tichitaura kuti Zimbabwe yakatomboita this seat kuma 1980s and also early 1990s. Yaitovamo mu UN, United Nations Security Council, as a non-permanent member. Non-permanent member. What do you think? Because think about it. United States, Britain, Russia, China. Think about it. Those countries, dzine power, dzinogara dzirimo. Iyo yatiri United Nations Security Council, dzinogara dzirimo. It's permanent. But isusu techingonzi pindai mobuda mopuwa 2 years mobuda. So you have to understand that Africa as a whole must actually unite and have one president. That's the only way we can become, we can have a strong voice and become a power on a world stage. Talking about world politics, Africa must unite and become one country. Continent kudidi no, inofana kuita chinyika chimwe chete. So anyway, muri Zimbabwe tipopa muzindo wevanhu, ndini wenyu Super Galo. Stay tuned, boys. Track by SM updates. Peace.